Hello and welcome to the Austin CAD User Group YouTube channel. My name is Adam Riley and today I am going to discuss the Sheet Set Manager. So first off, for those that are unfamiliar with it and where its location is, on your Home tab you can find it under your Palettes tab. Down here it's this button right here called the Sheet Set Manager. As you can see, also Control 4 will open it up, or if you're a command line person you can type SSM to open it. So the Sheet Set Manager is simply just an interface with 3 tabs and several other functions to help you organize your sheet sets. Now your sheet sets are files, essentially database files, that contain information and links to sheets, model or paper space views on your sheets, and various custom attribute data. So very quickly, let's go over the parts of the Sheet Set Manager that you may interact with regularly or not. When the Sheet Set Manager first opens up, you're brought to the Sheet List tab, which is the primary location that you would use to organize your sheets in your sheet set. You then have a Sheet Views tab, which is where you would organize saved views that are inserted onto a drawing or into the paper space of a drawing. So you can have multiple views, insets or details, or typically how they would be referred to outside of the sheet set. And then you have your Model Views tab. And I particularly like this tab because it allows you to organize all your drawings within a folder and see them so that you can open them directly or place them onto a sheet. So when I get to a point where we'll talk about that more, I'll show you some examples of how that would work. Alright, so first off, let's go back to the sheet list. The most common application of the Sheet Set Manager is simply organizing and numbering and naming your sheets. So the first thing we'll need to do in order to work through that is I'll create a sheet list. So in this pull down we have several options where we can go to recent sheet lists that we've worked on, we can create a new sheet set, or we can open a sheet set. So I'm going to just create a new sheet and it'll pop up this little wizard dialog box where you can either use a template to create your sheet set from, or if you already have your drawings created, you can select your drawings using this option. I'm just going to use my template. I'll hit the next button, and because my template is predefined in my AutoCAD settings, it already populates into these sections. So since they're pre-populated, I don't have to go look for it. If you have multiple sheet set templates, you may see more than one listed right here, but I only have one template that houses everything I need in my particular instance. Your company may be different. That's totally going to be up to you and your company. So since I only have one sheet set template, it's predefined, I'm just going to click next. And this is where you'll find the name of the file itself, any optional description you want to give it, and then a location you want to save that file to. In this instance, I've created a special folder just to save this, to keep it away from my project data. Now we also have sheet set properties, which are custom properties that you can add in, or there are actual pre-built properties. So this whole section, sheet set, project control, and sheet creation, these are all default and come standard in any sheet set. The data under sheet set custom properties are things that I personally have added to this template so that I have a wealth of information that I could reuse throughout my project. As you can see, I have surveyor information, subdivision information, SDs or replats, preliminary plats, final plats, city information, all things that get used and reused regularly on the project would be a great example of what to put into sheet set custom properties. Now going back up, this section here calls out your basic information. This name that you would list right here is exactly what would be listed in the name section on the previous dialog box. So if I were to change the name right here, we'll say ACUG sheet set. That name will be reflected here once we close out of this dialog box. This description here is also tied to this optional description that was on the previous dialog box. Model view, now this is linked to the model view tab that's on the sheet set, and you can click this little button right here, and it by default has no information listed. You can just click the add button and add a folder to it. So in this example, I'm apparently remembering a previous project that I was on. So I'm going to just click on a couple of folders. Let's see where I put that information. Let's say right here, go in here and just hit open. So this is the folder that I'm saving my sheet set to. So any files that we put in there we'll be able to see from our model view tab. So click OK and it'll add it in there. This label block for views, by my template I have a detail that I pre-use for labeling all my details. So when you insert your saved view of a drawing onto your sheet, it will automatically look for this block and it will bring it in and add it after you've inserted the view. And I'll show that more later. Callout blocks works at the other end of a detail or inset reference. If you're on your paperspace view of your base plans and you want to call out a detail, you would use this as a block that you could then insert that links back to a saved view that you've already inserted on a sheet. Your page setup overrides, that is typically, in my case, just my sheet template. It houses all the paperspace views and plotting settings that you would want to use so that you can reprint with those settings and not have to actually set those up every time. And then the project control is just some extra information you can put in, like your project number, its name, whatever phase you're working on, and any milestone you're working on. These kind of tie back to the architecture project manager section if anyone's ever worked with AutoCAD architecture. And then your sheet creation section is where your sheets will be created when you create a new sheet through the sheet set manager. It defaults to the folder you put your sheet set file in. You could always change it to a subfolder. Your sheet creation template is also preset, and this is a global setting that can be changed per subset, and I'll show you that more later. You can also prompt for a template, so every time you create a new sheet, do you want to use just this template or do you want to be able to use a different template? So if you were to change this to yes, every time you create a new sheet you'll be prompted for a new template. And then we're back down to our custom properties where you would put in any information that you're going to potentially reuse on a project. Alright, so I'll click OK, and as we see, the name of the sheet gets updated, and then we can click next, and it'll just give you a little overview, preview of all the information that you've put into the sheet set. You can click OK or finish, and it will create the sheet set and open it directly in the sheet set manager. Alright, and as you can see, if you highlight over your sheet set name in the sheet section, it will give you all kinds of information about the sheet set, and at this point it's essentially just going to be all of your custom property data. Alright, so at this point you can just start creating your sheets if that's where you are in your project. You would right click on this and you have an option for new sheet or new subset, or if you already have sheets created you could import them separately. This would be a really great place to create your first sheet for a project. You would then just save that sheet over and over, and then you could just re-import them all globally, organize them, and rename them. it's really up to you on how you would want to best do that, but it seems to be a lot faster and easier to set up one sheet, save it, import it, save it, import it. That way it's always going to be the same settings. You don't have to change things like your title block or all your text placement for your title block or the notes that you would insert onto a typical sheet or every sheet. So let's hit the new sheet button, and it will pop up this dialog box that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, where you can give your sheet a number and a title. So let's say we're going to say this is sheet 1, site plan. And as you can see, it's going to start filling in the file name based on your number and name. You can always tab down or click in and highlight to change this name if it is not a name that your company uses as a standard naming convention. It also lists the folder path so that if you've forgotten or you don't know where your sheets are going to be saved to, you can see it right here. It will also list out the template that you're currently using for the sheet, so you could always verify this information as you're going through your project, and if it doesn't look right, you can always click cancel and go back and reset those, because at this point you cannot change these two. That's why they're grayed out. The only things you can change are these three options. So now that we've set up a new sheet, and also might want to point out that if you have this checked, when you click OK, it will open that file directly, and that's what we want to do at this point. So I'm going to click OK. It is going to create the sheet, save the sheet, and open the sheet. We'll also add it to the sheets list with the number and title that we've given it. Alright, so in my template I have it predefined to have a title block, a basic legend, and a note placeholder, along with my north arrow and scale bar. My viewport's preset so that all my drawings will always have this space to work in. My text in here, as you can see, my site plan's name is right here, and my number is right here. Right. So the only things that I would normally typically have to do is make sure this title block is xref'd correctly. As it is, it's going back to my standards folder, and that's the way my template is set up, so I always have a title block pre-saved, preset. All I have to do is create one specific to my project. That is not what I'm going to do in this project, or in this case, because that's really something everyone should already know how to do and isn't really part of sheet set management. However, if you look right here, I have 4 little hash marks which indicate that there's some kind of field here that's broken, and that in my case is typically linked to something in the sheet set, just as well as this date, which is typical of our signature block for our engineers. So that would be changed within the sheet set. Usually in the beginning we would set it in one of the project pieces of information, the custom data right there, and then when we create our project specific title block, we would assign it or link it to that. So just for an example from within this sheet, if I were to edit this text, I'm going to just add a new line, and I'm going to insert a new field using insert field. If we filter our field category down to sheet set, we have all these options that we can access. So because we're in the sheet and the sheet knows it's part of a sheet set, we could use any number of these current sheet or sheet set properties. But in the case of this piece of text that's within my title block, I wouldn't be able to do that because my title block doesn't know it's part of a sheet set. So in that case, I would use this option here, the sheet set option, where when I click on it, it changes the middle section of the dialog to give me a list of sheet sets. And because this current sheet set is the only one I have open, it's the only one that's listed. However, I can always go and look for another sheet set by clicking on this ellipsis button. And below that dialog box is the actual sheet set. So you can see it's the same structure as what you would see in the sheet set manager, where it's the name of the sheet set and each of the sheets in it. And then on the right you have your formatting options and then properties that are within the sheet set. If I were to change and click on the sheet itself, it would change the properties that are available. So in this case we can see the sheet number and title, which would format it as one string, or just the sheet title, or just the sheet number. And if we look at the top here, we can see our preview of what it is we would actually be putting into our field in our piece of text. So going back, sheet number and title gives us sheet number hyphen title. And then we have some of the other built-in options like the revision number, revision date, issue purpose, or category. Now if we go back to our sheet set itself, then we have access to its properties as well as all the custom properties that I've previously given my template. So in this case, if I wanted to change that, which is typically in our case like the project description or project name, we would just select project name. Again, because I didn't fill it out in the sheet set, it's only going to give me blanks. And this is the typical text that the sheet set gives when there's no information within your fields. I like to personally put a placeholder in there so that at least when I print it, I could look at it, or someone else could look at it and say, oh, that field is blank, that's the field that needs to be filled in. We can go back to the sheet set manager and fill it in and not even have to open my file to fill it in. Which is one of the greatest flexibility and strongest points of using sheet set custom data, is that if you're editing from the sheet set manager, you don't have to open a file to fill in a piece of text. As an example, if I were to look at my legend here, I have a space for limits of construction where we have just a blank acreage field. I can come in here and press Control F to get fields. I can go to my sheet set properties, make sure I'm on my sheet set, and if I come down here and look for my project LOC, which if I can remember where I put it, it seems someone's removed it from my template. Well, in that case, I can go back, exit out of this editing text, and I can come back in here and recreate it. So if I right click on the sheet set, down here at the bottom is properties. It'll open up that same dialog box we saw when we were first creating it, but down here at the bottom we have edit custom properties. This will give us again a list of all the custom properties for the sheet set, and we can simply just click the add button. And in this case I'm going to just type in project LOC. I like to use underscores, but that's up to you. You cannot use spaces whatsoever, so you need some kind of designation or one word field names. I also like to again just put the field name in here, but I like to close it with brackets so that it's easier to see that that's a placeholder. Alright, and at this point let's point out that we also have this owner section. That just indicates who owns this data. Is it the sheet set or a sheet? And if we were to, since we are on sheet set, that means it's going to be available to the whole sheet set as long as we click on the sheet set itself while we're referencing it. A sheet owner means that this data is sheet specific. So if I were to create a sheet specific field and then reference it from the current sheet custom data, then that sheet is going to have its own data that can be changed per sheet. And I'll show you a real quick example of that. So let me close this so that we've inserted that. Let me add a new field and we'll say current sheet data. We'll add in this is a sheet, and we'll change it as sheet. If I click OK, it'll just add it to the list. I'll click OK again, and then if we look up here, it's added a sheet custom properties section that is just sheet specific data. I'll click OK, and then if I were to come back over to, I can now right click on the sheet itself and go to its properties, and it now has sheet custom properties. So at this point I can change this. I can say this is sheet 1 or O1. If I click OK, and then just to illustrate this, I'll right click on the property and select the properties of the sheet set itself, and that did not change. This will be the default value that is assigned to every new sheet or every sheet that's already in the set when this field is added. Alright, so I'll click OK to get back out. I'll come back to, let's say I was editing, and I'll insert my field. I'll come back to the sheet set. My property is a sheet set property, so instead of going to the sheet set and finding it over here, I want to specifically pull from just my sheet set. So doing it this way lets you look for data from another sheet set or a sheet set that you're not in a file from, like my title block, but it also kind of creates a risk that someone may not be paying attention to what sheet set they're looking at. If you have several sheet sets open, you may accidentally pick the wrong sheet set. If your template is preset to be pointing at a sheet set rather than the current sheet set, and someone doesn't think to go change it, you'll have this link back to an old sheet set or a sheet set that might be archived out and may no longer exist, and then you'll have placeholder text that you'll never be able to change easily without realizing that it's actually not connected to your project. So you want to keep using the current sheet set whenever you're in a sheet that is part of your sheet set. So I'm looking at my limits of construction. I want to go to my current custom sheet custom properties, and it'll list down here all the sheet set properties that are custom properties of your sheet set. So I can come back down here and I can see my project LOC. Since I only put a placeholder in there, it's going to show me what my preview is. If I click OK, it's going to just put in the piece of text that I put in there. Alright, and then I can click back out and I've updated, and my text is the way it should be. Now, as a example, I'm going to just show the sheet set custom properties. So again, I press Control F to insert a field. On the same categories, I'm going to change it to sheet set custom, and then it's going to show me only what I have in the sheet set as sheet custom properties. So since I only have the one, it defaults to that. At this point you can also change the formatting. Since I typed it all in uppercase, it doesn't matter, but if you have options on how you want it to look, you can change it. And then click OK to insert it into the text, and it'll be inserted as a field. So if you click on it, it gets highlighted. And since it's dynamically linked to the sheet set, if I were to come back and I needed to change that piece of text, I can now just go into the sheet properties, change this text, and either remove it and type in something else. This is a placeholder. I click OK. It doesn't update automatically. Just like any other field, you have to do a regen to make it update all the field text. But then it updates all your field text, right? So that's how the custom property data works in the sheet set. Just like any other field that you've used, it's going to be linked to some source. The sheet text, the sheet title, the sheet number, that's all linked back. Let's just keep this open. So the number and the title, they're all linked here. You could change those at any point, and the fastest and easiest way to do that is to right click on a sheet, and there's an option, rename and renumber. So the rename and renumber sheet dialog box looks just like the creation sheet, but with a few more options at the bottom. So at this point you can change your number, we'll say 10, and change it to the site, change the name of it, let's say we can call it utility plan. But it's not going to change the layout, because this is actually telling you what the layout of the sheet is. So down here our layout was named the same as our sheet. Now we can rename it, so if I were to type 10 utility plan, it's not going to update it yet. If I tab next, it doesn't make any changes because I haven't officially pushed these changes. Now if you notice, our file name is grayed out as well as our folder path. That's because we're in the file, and because we're in the file we can't edit the file. We can't rename the file, we can't move the file. So if you were not in any sheets, this would be white and you would be able to edit that. But you could also automate the changing of layout and file name with these options down here. So if you wanted to change the layout, you can click this button and it would gray that out so you couldn't change it, but it will dynamically link it to whatever you change the title to. So if I were to take the word plan out, it's going to say utility. So let me put that back in. If I were to check this box, it's going to put the number in, just like I had it written. And it would be the same for if I didn't have the file open, these options would be available. I could click this button to rename the sheet to match the sheet title, or prefix it with the sheet number. So if I were to just click OK now, it's going to change the sheet number and title, and it changed the layout to match. Alright, so now that I've shown you how to rename sheets, use custom property data, one of the most common requests or questions people have about the sheet set is, how would I show a total count number? Unfortunately, the sheet set doesn't have something like that pre-built in, but I've already shown you the mechanism we would use for that. First, we would right click on our sheet set, go down to properties, and it would be a sheet set custom property. In this case, because we do multiple phases of a project, I have a counter for each phase. So my final plat, my preliminary plat, my SIs or my SDs, I would come in here and I would just type in the number of how many sheets there are, and then in my sheet numbering section of my sheet I would add in the of and a field that points back to this counter. So I would edit my text, type in of, Control F, current sheet set custom, and then I would come down here and find whichever count it is that I'm looking for. So in this case, SDs, that's the most common set we would work in. And then I would hit OK, and it would fill it in. And as long as I put a number in there, that's what it would show. So going back, properties, let's go down, scroll down to SDs, type in 10. Do a region, and I've updated. But of course, I would change the font to be able to fit within my title block. Alright. The second most common thing I think the sheet set is used for is publishing. One of the most powerful things about it is that you can publish all your sheets or a set of sheets from this dialog box without ever having to open the sheet. And that is done simply by clicking on the sheet or sheets you want to publish, and either right clicking to go to the publish options, or this button right here is the exact same button. It is all the publish options. So by default you can publish to a DWF or DWFX or a PDF or the plotter that is preset within your drawing. So if I click out of here and zoom out, you can see that I've got a sheet set up, and I'll really quickly just go to the page setups of this file. It's set up to print to a 34 by 22 PDF. So close back out of this, go back to my publishing options. If I were to click publish to plotter, whatever was in that page setup, which in this case was my PDFs, if I were to just click on that, it will go straight to a PDF. Now, you also have the flexibility, and this is where that page setup override came from in your sheet set properties, is using the page setup overrides, you could tell it, oh, I don't want to use what it's preset to. I don't want it to go to a specific PDF or DWF. I want it to go to a specific plotter. I want it to go to my Xerox or my OSE or whatever plotter you have. Your page setup override file should have those settings, and then you could just select them and it would just print that sheet using those settings. Right. Now there are some other editing controls you have. So if, let's say, you have 100 sheets and there's some sheets that you don't want to print, you could come in here and set them individually by changing the include for publish to no. So you don't have to manually go through and say, oh, I don't want to print that sheet, I don't want to print this sheet every time. You could just say, no, don't ever print this sheet, and then you can select the entire sheet set, publish it, and it will just ignore any of the ones that you've told not to include for publishing. But this is typically only really used for doing one sheet at a time. You could always go down one more item and go to the edit subset and sheet publish settings. Now it's not going to show a whole lot since I only have the one sheet, but you can come through here and unselect all the sheets you don't want to print. In this case, since I only have the one, it's going to turn off essentially my entire sheet set. But this is an easy way to go through and do multiple sheets at a time. You can just click, 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 and so on. All right. Coming back to the publishing options, you can also check this publish in reverse order. So if you want to publish from the bottom of your sheet list instead of from the top, you can do that. And for me, I like this because I can then open two versions or two instances of AutoCAD, print the sheet set from the top in one, come in here, click this on, and print the second version from the bottom, and then cut my plotting time in half. You also have the option to include a plot stamp, and your plot stamp settings are right here. Just the same plot stamp settings, that you will see in your basic AutoCAD settings. Normally your CAD manager or company has its own settings for this. So these are all defaults because we have ours as a part of our title block, so we don't bother to use these. Back into our publish options, we have just a few more options. We have our manage page setups, which is just that same page setup manager that you would get if you were to right click on your layout tab. All the same options that are in your current file, but they're actually stored with your sheet set. Close that back out, come back to our publish settings again, and we have two more publish options dialog boxes. These are both essentially the same thing. The DWF options is going to give you a dialog box that looks kind of like the sheet set properties dialog box, where you can come through here and change your settings to whether you want a single sheet, a single DWF for each sheet, or you want a single DWF for the entire set. If you want to specify the name now, which then you would change right here, or prompt for name when it plots. So when you have a multiple sheet file, which is where you have more than one drawing in this file, it's going to let you prompt for a name. If you were to do a single sheet file, it will block that out and just automatically give it the name of the sheet. You can include your layers. By default, you don't want to do that. Lines overwrite, that would be your same option that you see in some of your other plotting options for how lines merge when they're over each other. Do you want to include more information about your blocks, your sheet set, your Civil 3D objects, stuff like that? Pretty much all standard DWF options that you would see in your main DWF plotting. Now the dialog box for PDF publish options looks like the same standard old dialog box you would see when you're within your plotting dialog box and you just hit the properties for your PDF thing. But it's the same options. You have prompt for a name, multi-sheet file or not. You have quality options, and you have your line overwrite or your line merge. So this shows you an example of what that would be like. Or include your information. It even has the additional font capturing. Right. Oh, I clicked past that too quickly. You also can change where your PDFs are going to be plotted to. So if you plot to PDF from your sheet set, this option is going to be whatever was stored in your template. In my case, my template was created from one of the earliest projects I worked on at my current firm, and I've never really updated that because I have to update it for every project anyway. So changing it in my template really didn't matter as much because you have to change it every time you create your template. So that is one caveat that you need to remember, is that's one of the few things the sheet set manager does not automatically change when you create a new sheet set, is where it's going to publish PDFs. And then if we go back to the publish pull down, the very last option is the publish dialog box. This is just the same multi-sheet publisher that you've probably seen before, where you can actually specify a list of sheets that you may have saved as a separate, I believe it's a DSD file, or you can specify, just like you could from the right click menus, either to plot to the plotter that the sheet is saved to, or to a DWF or PDF. You can change the sheet set properties, that same dialog box we just saw in the DWF sheet set properties. And this is where you would list out and order the sheets that you want to print. So if you wanted to add more sheets than just the ones that came from your sheet set, you would be able to just add them right here and go find the sheet and add them into the list. Or you could remove them from the list. And then you have the options to include the plot stamp, or publish in the background, or open whatever viewer, like if you print a PDF or DWF, you can open those directly after it's printed. Right. So canceling back out of that. Alright, I believe that covers everything from this tab. Oh, no, let me talk to you about sheet set selection sets. So one of the other buttons up here, so we have export to DWF and the plotting and this sheet selections. This is to me, relatively new. I believe it's been part of the sheet set for a while, but I've become very accustomed to using this. It is great for organizing sheets. As an example, if you're in construction or bidding and you're doing revisions to the project or addendum, this would be a great way to save sheets that you're working on or want to be released at a certain point. So as an example, I have my now utility plan selected. If I click on this pull down, I have the option to create a new sheet set selection set, and it'll just prompt me for a name. Let's say sheet 10. Sheet 10. Click OK. And then if I were to unselect it and then come back to this, it now lists that selection set, and I can click on it and it's going to select those sheets. Again, in this case I only have one sheet, so it's not the most optimal data set. So actually, let me give you a really good example. If I go back to a project that I've been working on for some time, that is something like 120 sheets, and we've gone through several revisions and whatnot. If I were to select one of these, here are all the sheets that were changed in that revision. Right. And then I can go or pick another one, and it's going to unselect and select that new set of sheets. So it's a really powerful way to organized sheets so that you don't have to go through and manually pick your sheets every time you need to print them. Like in my case, I use them for my revisions or my addendum so that I know what sheets need to be printed when it's finally time to release those sheets. Because honestly, sometimes your sheets can get pretty lengthy and you don't want to have to sit there and go, oh, it's that sheet, it's this sheet way down here, it's these 3 sheets here, that sheet. That could be time consuming, and having to do that every time you need to plot can be a hassle. So that's one of the really nice things about this sheet selection set. Okay, so that's definitely everything I wanted to show you on the sheet list tab. For me, I think these lists are a little out of order, because you normally work in the sheet list, but you're then going to probably need to work in the model view tab before you work in the sheet view tab. So to me, it would make more sense if the model view were above the sheet view, but it isn't. However, I'm just going to skip the sheet view and go to the model view tab. I'm still showing you one of my older projects, but it's still a really good example of how this tab could be used. So first off, if I were to go back to this just as the example, if you remember back when I created that sheet set, in the properties, if I go to properties really quickly, and this model view section, see where it has this path, the sheet set manager folder. If I go over to model views, that's the path that it put in there, and you can expand that path and you can see all the folders and files that are in it. If I go to, say, this project and I expand that out, it's going to show you all the files that are in that project, all my sheets, all my base files, my subdirectory, and all that. Now if you notice, every folder and file has a plus mark next to it, which obviously means you can expand it. So if I were to click on a folder, well, that one didn't have anything in it. Let's maybe check this folder. Alright, let me find one that does have one. My details. I know those always have them because what this is looking for is a saved view. So if I were to open this, I have 3 views for my lift station detail. So say my lift station, and if you were to click and highlight over it, you'll see a preview of what's in that view. I click over this one, a preview of that detail, or that detail. Nice little 3D model of it. This other one has in there, so we have, well, in the view preview you can see the main detail, and off to the right you can see the other one. If I click on this one, you can see that one and part of the original, which would be this one. So this would be a great way to organize your project folder, because you can see all your base files or whatever. In the case of my template that I created for this presentation, I only have, say, a couple of details that I just threw in the folder. A flume section or curb ramp. Basically anything that you want to place on your drawing, you want to be able to access from your model view tab. So in the case of one of my projects, I basically reference my whole drawings folder so that I can see everything. Because personally, I like to use this tab as a little project navigator. So if you expand or close that back up, you can see all the subfolders in the project folder plus the base files. So if I were to want to work on a base file, I can get to it easily and still be self-contained within the project through the sheet set manager. So it is a great way to keep a drafter or user contained in the project so that they don't have to keep going back and forth or getting lost in the file structure of your company, or if they're in one folder and they hit open but it remembers another folder and they don't pay attention, things like that. This is a great way to just keep things a little more organized and keep people a little more focused on what it is they're supposed to be working on. So let's go back over to the sheets that I created for this. Since I have details in here, I'm going to show you how you would best use these views just to be inserted into a drawing. So first off, we're going to act as if this is a detail sheet, and I'm going to delete the viewport so that I don't have to worry about accidentally clicking into it or anything. And then I'm going to pick a detail. So I have these two already. Let's just say this flume section. If you right click on it, you have two options. You have open, which will obviously just open the file, but it will also go directly to that view. So for example, if you have a drawing that has multiple details in it, let's see if I have one listed here. Right, so like the dumpster details, they're arranged in like a grid of details, and I want to go to that specific one. I would just right click on it, say open. It'll open the file, see how they're all in a grid, and once it loads, it goes directly to that view. That way you know that's the one you're working on, that's the one you want to get to, and since you're in the file, you can now just right click, open on another one, it'll go straight to that one. Or you don't even have to right click, go to open, you can just double click. Go to the ones you want to look at. Alright, I'm going to close that, and let's say I want to place that view on this drawing. The second option that you had when you right clicked on the view was place on a sheet. So you'll select that, it'll load in a huge viewport, which is sometimes a little bug based on the scale of your drawing and the scale of the original drawing. It doesn't always give you this view like this, but sometimes it does glitch like that. However, if you wait and look at the little tooltip, it shows you the scale that it's going to insert it at, and it also has a little piece of tooltip text that you can right click and change your scale. So if you right click, it'll list all the scales that are in your current drawing, not the drawing that you're referencing in. Remember, your current drawing. So if your details are in architectural scales and it has a list of architectural scales, you're going to need those in the drawing you're in, because obviously this one doesn't have any architectural scales except for this one, which I guess was one of the default that nobody ever purged out of our template. But if you need to change your scale, you can select any one of the scales you need here. Let's say if I want this detail to come in at 1 to 10. It's going to show you a preview of what that would look like, or it should if it weren't glitching out. However, you could tell what your detail is going to look like, because that little preview that we can see right here is the scale. That is actually what it's going to look like when it comes in. But in this instance, it looks a little skewed. Won't know till I bring it in. Let me go back to the scale it was going to bring it in, and I'm going to just insert it here. Oh, and I guess I was incorrect, and the viewport was what was right. Let me undo that. Let's see. So if I undo that, right click again to place. Okay, so that's, if that's correct, then I'll right click, change my scale to 10 to make it smaller, and I'll place it right there. Okay. So I guess my glitch wasn't really a glitch, so I apologize for that. But now notice that my cursor isn't back to a normal cursor, and I have something popped up down here on my command line. So what it's asking, if I hit this F2, go back, it looks like it's asking for attribute values after an insertion point. So if you remember your processes for other AutoCAD commands, that sounds like it's adding a block with some attributes, and it has some default values that it's trying to input. So if I were to press enter for viewport scale, and then title, and then number, it just added a block. Well, what is this block? If I were to select this and look at properties, let's see, what is this block's name? MS detail title. That does sound familiar. If I were to go back to my sheet set and go to the properties, if we were to look back at label block views, that detail, MS detail title. So whenever you insert a view, it's going to go find this block and it's going to insert that block. So what we saw in the prompts was it's asking for a scale, which is this part of the block, and that's going to be now tied to the detail viewport. It was asking for a number, and it was asking for the title, and because we were inserting the concrete flume section, that's the title it gave us. Now, this is now the step we would take to go to the Sheet Views tab and see that it added this view to the sheet. And because it asked us for a title and a number, but we only have a title, we want to add a number. So if we were to pick our view, right click, we have the same options we had for renaming and renumbering sheets, but it's for views only, and it's a condensed version of the sheet rename renumber, to where it only asks for number and name. So I'm going to say 01 for the number and just leave the title the same. Click OK, and it's going to update in the sheet views list. And then if I regen in my drawing, it's pre-populated so that it updates there. Now, because it also has tied the sheet view and its scale, if I were to double click into my model or my viewport and just change my scale, so I'm going to zoom a little, double click back out, and I'm going to zoom in just for clarity. If I do a regen, it's going to update the scale to match what the viewport scale is now. Now, because I don't actually have architectural units in here, but if I look down here at our scale selector, it says 0.0625, which is 3/4 to 1 inch, which is oddly specific for having just clicked the zoom button once. But that's neither here nor there. So now that we've inserted our view and our label, a few things to point out is that I am currently on my Anno reference layer. If I select my viewport, it's also on that layer. If I unselect that and select the block, it's also on that. So I say that to point out that whatever layer you're on when you insert your view is the layer that both your block and your viewport are going to be put on. If your standard workflow is that your viewport needs to be on a no plot layer, you're going to need to put it on a no plot layer or be on the no plot layer and then change the text. If you're vice versa, where your text needs to be on a specific layer, then you want to be on that layer, you're going to have to change the viewport manually. So it is a little bit more work, but it's a lot less work than manually inserting this view yourself and then labeling it and setting up a view in the sheet view, which you don't necessarily have to do unless you want to call it out from within your plans. One of the benefits of inserting the view into the sheet list is that now that it's a view listed on your sheet, you can come through here, let's use this note placeholder again, and if I insert a new field, I'm going to select my sheet set, and then unfortunately the only way to link it is by using the sheet set list, well, we'll want to use the view, honestly, the sheet view, and because I have two sheet sets open, I need to make sure I'm looking at the one I want to see, and the detail I inserted, so it's a categorized detail, which I'll talk about in a moment, is I can now select that view and I can select some properties from it. So I can select its title or its number or even its scale. So if I want to know what scale something is, I want to call it out from somewhere else, I could reference this information. Unfortunately, this is the only information we can access from a view at this time. But typically we want to see or reference the number of a detail. So let's say we're going to use just this sheet view number. We'll click in here, we'll say we've just inserted that. This would be a typical detail call out. We'll say see detail 01 on sheet, and then we can insert a reference to that sheet number. So that would be a great way to call out a detail if you don't have a block call out. If you're just writing notes and saying and pointing to things on your plans, this would be a great way to label it so that it's dynamic, so that if you have to move it around or renumber your sheets, they'll be automatically updated and you won't have to go find your notes on your plans and update them yourself. Okay. The only caveat to that is that if this view this view on the sheet is removed, so let's say I remove this. Oh, it just removed it from the sheet view list, but if you zoom back in on here, that number's still there. Well, it's there because it's a field and it hasn't updated. If I were to regen, now that link is broken essentially, and it's just going to put its own little error number information in there. So just keep that in mind. If you place a view and you're referencing that view, but then you remove that view, you'll have to make sure your references to that view, if you followed all that, are updated. I can probably undo to get that view back on here. So undo, undo, undo. Oh, yep. And then it's back on the sheet list. Making sure that these are updated. Oh, I guess I undid too far where I undid the renumbering. So there we go. We're back to those being updated. Oh, and speaking of the layering of the viewport and the text, I just want to point out that when you insert a new view, you make your viewport active and you go to your layer list, all your layers except for this one will be frozen in the viewport, and this one is the layer that it places the XREF on for this detail. So if I select that, you can see up here that it's on that layer specifically. And to point out again, I just said it's an XREF, not a block that's inserted. So if I were to go to my XREF manager, you'll see there's an XREF of my flume section file, which is the detail. So if I show you this project, I have in my project data, I have its folder for details. It is all my details, and I keep them project specific for this reason, is that when you insert a view onto a sheet, it is not going to insert all the data of that view. It is only going to XREF the file that that view is contained in. So if I go back and I picked the concrete flume section to insert, it's going to bring in my flume section DWG as an XREF. If you have a file that has attached XREFs, it's going to bring those as well, just like any other xref command would. If you have overlaid xrefs, they're not going to come along. But its layer state, its xrefs, whatever's in the view is going to come along as an xref, just the way a typical xref would be. But it's going to create it on its own layer, named after the file that is being xref'd in. And it's going to freeze every other layer so that if you have other content that occupies the exact same space as that file, it won't be seen in the background. Like if I were to insert this detail, I'll place, have to be in paper space. If I insert my detail for fire lane striping and just click through all my questions for the label, if I click in here and turn on Flume 2 set detail section, see this line that just popped up? If I zoom out, that is part of the block for the frame of that detail. So they operate in the same space. Everything in our details is drawn close to 0, 0. And that's probably typical in most firms where they just open up a new drawing and they start drawing new details. So in order to not have this overlapping detail problem, it will just freeze every layer that's not part of this file's original xref file or the layer it gets put on, but it will freeze everything else. So again, if we're in this viewport, everything was frozen before I unfroze this one, except for that layer. And this is new. I don't know if it's a bug or something where it's adding 2 layers, because it used to only be just the one layer. It didn't add a second one, and I'm not sure where and why that's happening. Alright, so I did mention something about categorization of details earlier. If we go back to the sheet views, and I now have 2 details listed here, we have these 2 little options up here, view by sheet or view by category. Currently we're viewing by sheet, where it's listing all your sheets that have views on them, in this case just my utility plan. Or we can view by category, where it'll switch it to showing the categories you've created for your details. Like the default category for any saved view is always none. You can see that when you use your view command and create a new one. It has a none category, and this is where you would actually assign your categories to your details. Is you can create details or view categories. So in a blank drawing you would only have none. You can just start typing in this new category or something like that. You would have to actually give it a name. Click OK, and then on your view list you would actually have the categories listed here too. And because these are layout views, they'll be shown, or these are on paper space, they're layout views. They'll be listed here. If you're in your file where you created your details, they would be listed under model views. Again, those are why they're listed under the model views here. Let's click OK. Oh, and it just created, because I'm in a sheet that is in the sheet set, it added that category to this sheet. And because I actually created a view called test1 that is this exact view, if I were to just pan over here and double click on it again, it'll put me right back to it. But that's essentially what the categorization is for, is if you want to group things together, like say all your wastewater that may be on more than one sheet, you can group them by wastewater or water, or in this case city specific details. It's a good way to try and keep your data housed with like data, or just categorizing, keeping your data organized. Alright, and that is everything on the sheet views and the model views tab essentially. So if we go back to the sheet list tab really quickly, I have one other item that I probably should have shown you when I was here, but I forgot about, and it was more of a categorization and organizational thing. Is when you right click on your sheet set, there's an option to add a subset. Now, I did say I would go over this when I glossed over it earlier. Subset is essentially just a subgroup of sheets. So if I were to select new subset, it's going to give me this subset properties dialog box where we can give it a name. We'll just leave it as default. You can actually have it assign physical folders on in your project folder. So if you're saving all your files in a sheets folder and you want to break up your subsets by their groupings and put them in their own folders, you can automatically have it do that here by selecting yes. If you have different publish options that you want that subset to have, if you want them to be published at all, you would change that here. Again, where the sheet would go, and if you have this set to yes, that should change this and also not allow you to change it manually. Right, so it's going, in this case I'm going to just leave it to its default. You can also change the template of that subset and whether that subset will prompt you for a template or not. So it's very similar to the sheet set itself. It's just a subgroup of the sheet set. So you can have new sheets within that subset, or you could take a sheet that exists in your sheet set and just move it to that subset. So now it's part of that other group, and I can show this to you better using this other project where I have multiple subsets for all the different parts of this project. So in this case we have all of our groupings of our project as a subset and different sheets within, so that they're more organized and in more order, so that we could, like I just did, close up each set and just open up what we want to see. We can also go through and make changes to the properties of these subsets, just like we would the sheet set itself. However, we don't get to have those custom properties like the sheet set has. We only get what we preset when we created it, is the subset name, publish that subset, where the sheets get stored, and template. Alright, and that pretty much covers everything I had to go over on the sheet set manager. So if you have any questions about the sheet set manager or sheet sets or any of the things I showed you specifically in this video, feel free to reach out to me. My information will be listed in the comments. I'm always on the Discord for the user group. I'm on the LinkedIn page. You can get a hold of me either place. Again, my name is Adam Riley, and I hope this was helpful, informative, and I hope you are able to come see us at the next user group meeting. Just a little shout out to that, as we hold those the fourth Friday of every month about noon. No set location. They're usually hosted by a different firm, a different group of people, so we can get it spread around and everyone can come, because not everybody gets the Friday afternoon off like a lot of firms are moving to. So again, I hope this was helpful. Hope you learned something. I hope I hear from you. I see you at our meetings, and have a great rest of your day.